Hey everybody, it's John Pollock here alongside John Ramdeen and Robin Black. And the only reason we are talking to you is because we do have some breaking news courtesy of Ariel Helwani at MMAfighting.com reporting Friday afternoon that UFC light heavyweight champion Daniel Cormier is out of the main event of UFC 206 due to injury. They are now seeking a replacement for Anthony Johnson, and the question on everyone's mind is, Robin, how deep were you into this breakdown already?
I was getting there, but nothing too bad. Paul Shaughnessy, one of our guys, came out of the back and he's like, this is the face when you've just finished the best sting ever for DC versus AJ. This is part of the game. It's part of the game for everybody who works at the UFC. It's part of the game for the fans. It's sad, though. I feel for DC, man. He's a good dude. He's a hardworking guy who really wanted this fight, you know, and these are the last couple of defining years of his career to be able to show, you know, John Jones who kind of thing, and he went and got hurt.
This card, you know, it certainly met its criticism because of where it is in proximity to 205 and 207. Daniel Cormier sat in that very chair and said this is a major difference being on this card without George St-Pierre or with George St-Pierre. Big difference there. Now you have 2 weeks notice. And to me, this is not a simple slot to fill. Finding somebody at light heavyweight, you have, I don't know if any options. A guy who has beaten Ryan Bader this year, a guy who's beaten Jimmy Manawa. And looking at heavyweight, what incentive do you have as Anthony Johnson to take this fight on 2 weeks' notice?
I got something. So Ramdeen and I were in Kingston, Hayabusa, put on an event. And sitting, John was here, I was here, and GSP was here for 2.5 hours. And he talked, one of the things he told me very clearly is he's staying in shape as if he's fighting on that Toronto card. And I said, why? He goes, you never know how these things can go. There's twists and turns. George St-Pierre, 2.5 weeks out right now, is in shape and wants to fight. That's a fact. So can these guys go get that thing done? Because that is in play for sure.
Yeah, because I can't imagine anybody that's willing to take a fight against Anthony Rumble Johnson on 2 weeks' notice.
I don't think Anthony Johnson should. Like, you have to think.
He wants to fight, though. That's one thing about a lot of fighters.
He wants to fight for the title.
Sure, he does. And if there's some sort of guarantee, maybe a heavyweight option. Let's find somebody that you can fight at UFC 206, and despite the outcome, because it is at the heavyweight limit, it doesn't matter if you win or lose. Just go out, have a performance, and then you'll eventually fight for the light heavyweight championship when Daniel Cormier
I think these
returns.
are unrealistic expectations to place on fighters.
If I'm AJ, I'm saying maybe when's Dan in shape? Oh, February? Just give me that fight then.
Can you guarantee that, though?
I mean,
who else?
Yeah.
Cormier has no one. Johnson gets that title fight completely. There's no other option.
No, what I'm saying is, though, we were talking before, Daniel Cormier, it's not as if he's 21 years old. He's closer to 40 than he is 30.
Yeah, then AJ can fight in February if he's not there. We can have another fight that makes sense for him. What's George's guy's name? George's manager?
Rudolph.
Rudolph's on the phone right now with them. He is. They're on the phone right now. This is the play. I'm telling you, this is the play, and the play only works if George is in shape.
Can you really maximize it? Like, you get one shot at a George return. Are you going to do it on 2 weeks' notice with all that promotion?
I think so, because all of a sudden, for 13 days, it's nothing but that. Yeah. So a lot of time, that lead up, that's an old school mentality. Oh, our album drops in March, and let's start hyping it. Even in movies these days, they have a trailer to the trailer. There's no proof that that works in its incredibly crowded landscape. It's the hot 10 days before that are the hot 10 days.
George may indicate to you guys he wants to fight, but I mean, that team around him, they are a very conservative camp when it comes to risk taking. And to me, George fighting anybody, he's not getting any gimme fight. It would be someone serious, and I don't think George would have that ability to just look at an opponent and say, realistically, it would be 10 days of training, probably less, because
he's training. He's training as if he's fighting on that
Not for a specific opponent.
Sure.
Are you going to put him into a fight on 2 weeks' notice?
No, but if it comes down to $10 million, you look at what happened with Nathan Diaz and Conor McGregor won. It was only, less than 2 weeks that they had to push that card. And just like we saw with Michael Bisping, did he have a full training camp to become the middleweight champion of the world? The one thing about George St-Pierre and a lot of these legends, they know how to fight. They're in their most comfortable state inside the fire. And yes, it's not ideal, but we've seen throughout mixed martial arts history, things aren't always ideal. So if this is an opportunity for George to come in and save the day, if his management team can somehow get this fight together, the UFC says, okay, this is a suitable opponent, let's make it happen.
Have things changed that drastically? Because this card always needed George, and the UFC did not want to meet his demands. Is it in such a state at this moment where they are now going to give in to whatever George's team wants?
It depends on what it is. Okay, if the light heavyweight championship isn't on the line, does that mean that it's Max Holloway and Anthony Pettis fighting for 5 rounds? You have Duho Choi, you have Cub Swanson on the card, you have Donald Cerrone card.
I love the fights, but to get people to give you $59.99, it's
There's no way.
Yeah.
Like, this should realistically, we need to scale it back, much like they did with Johnny Hendricks and Stephen Thompson earlier this year when they lost the heavyweight title fight. This is a great free card. And to me, it's just, this is not a pay-per-view level card. We have all of these cards coming up that Anthony Johnson can be better utilized for. Why are we going to risk this for a card that Anthony Johnson versus anybody, heavyweight, light heavyweight, this is not going to be a gigantic fight for Anthony Johnson. It's just going to be to convince people for a main event. And I don't feel Anthony Johnson against any of these light heavyweights, even a heavyweight option, I don't think that's a very compelling pay-per-view headliner.
No, but you know what is? Right. Monday morning, George St-Pierre versus Anderson Silva in Toronto. It will be 95% of all the narrative everywhere in the sporting world if that were to happen. Yes, you wouldn't have the couple of months to do it, but in those 2 weeks, that would be a huge event.
There's no doubt about that. But we'll finish off on this. What is the percentage chance of that happening? I would say I will give you 7% chance of George St-Pierre being on this card. I could be completely wrong. There have been crazier things.
Sure, but when you and I, we've been having this conversation about IMG and the fact that they've dumped so much money into this and they need to recoup that $4 billion.
This is a big loss if this is not a pay-per-view.
And that's what it comes down to is, okay, do we want to spend $10 million on this guy? Well, we do if we want to get the return. If we want to, make all of our projections come to fruition, we have to get the biggest names in the game competing for the organization. So that's what it comes down to.
I would definitely agree with you that the percentage was low. There's one key ingredient that would make this possible, and that's George training as if he had a fight on December 10th. Is it the 10th?
Yes.
10th? And that is what George is doing. Man, we drank 8 beers each. George had none.
0.
We had all kinds of
So are you guys sure you remember this conversation? George might have said, I can come back within 2 months,
He looked us
2
in
years.
the face and said, I am training and I'm ready to go. And it is for a reason like this that the man would do it. He knew this wasn't happening, but he loves fighting. He's been training. He wants to live like an athlete, and sometimes these things happen. And yes, the percentage is low, but George is in shape and ready to fight.
The UFC can make it happen. That's the reality.
All right, we will find out if it is UFC 206 or UFC 20 Deep Sixth on December the 10th as Daniel Cormier is out of the main event against Anthony Johnson at the Air Canada Centre.